I have the pleasure of being here once again in a continuation of our tradition. I'm lucky enough to call him an esteemed friend, George Jacob, to talk all about things Siebel and CX that we have learned so far in our few days here in Las Vegas for Oracle CloudWorld. George, thanks very much for joining us. I hope you've had a good show so far.
I have, absolutely, Richard, and it's always good to see you and to continue our tradition now.
Yes, I think we must be coming on for, well, certainly since the Siebel Hub was founded in 2014, I would imagine that next year will be a cause for celebration. We will have to find a way to mark 10 years of our tradition.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I haven't thought what yet. Several people have suggested that I should be shot from a cannon, but I don't think that's anything to do with the 10-year anniversary.
I'm not joining you in that.
That's very kind of you. Yes, perhaps you can hold the camera when we do that. So, for those of our Siebel Hub readership who aren't able to make it to Las Vegas, of course there is these days a massive amount of content available online through the medium of the internet. But what is useful when we're talking together is to give a flavour of what are the undercurrents of what's going on here in Las Vegas. There's always themes that come out. So for you, what's been the marquee idea or the marquee theme so far?
Well, probably no surprise. So you didn't have to travel to Las Vegas to the idea of the year, kicked off by ChatGPT and OpenAI, is generative AI, large language models, and I'm happy to say CloudWorld has not differed in that sense. I think there's been a lot of discussion about AI. There's a continuation, of course, of discussion about the Oracle Cloud and how our applications are coming together there. That brings the data together, and then that's really the foundation, really, for AI. I think as Larry Ellison said, AI has been a theme, but it's probably standing out more this year than in past years. Yeah. Now, I think maybe a little joke, but as people have said about the weather, everyone's talking about it. I can't say yet that. In fact, I think there's acknowledgement that not enough of us are doing enough about it, I think that's probably the two things that probably jump out at me the most as we're all talking about AI, but I think we're still figuring our way out towards it.
I think I agree with you on how AI has become the theme of the show, and I think that in Larry Ellison's keynote yesterday, the striking thing for me was just how many practical applications there are that are already with us, that are not sketches on a piece of paper. I was astonished when they were talking about first responders and autonomous drones, and obviously the massive amount of work that's going into healthcare in terms of identifying, automating that process of whereby a doctor would be looking at an X-ray or some form of scan and trying to make a judgment call based on that photo in a sense. So those are all really, for me, concrete, real-life examples that are with us already. Bringing it back to one of our areas of interest, how is the world of Siebel being affected in real life by those potential benefits of AI for you today?
Well, we've been on a journey to the cloud. I think it really started most significantly with Innovation Pack 17. There were Siebel versions previous to that, I think going back to 2015, that were available in the Oracle marketplace.
That's right. Yeah.
But both within Siebel and then outside, I think we all heard about Uber using OCI. Zoom I think has announced maybe last year that they were at least partially using OCI. So there's been sort of an evolution since 2015, and now that's 8 years, of OCI itself growing, and then Siebel, certainly since 2017, most significantly, growing our architecture towards using cloud technology, frequently with OCI, but occasionally, or I would say a fair amount also outside of OCI, because that's where Siebel customers are for the most part. With respect to AI, I think last October with 22.10, we released our first integration between Siebel and OCI AI services in the areas of speech to text, conversions, and PII, personally identifiable information detection. And so we're really looking at OCI and AI services in general, and when large language models and generative AI take us in that direction, being able to leverage not only the hardware that a cloud, an expandable or contractible cloud installation will give you, but also the functional services that provide AI. And then starting to look at what are the, and in fact, we had a couple of customers, American Airlines among them, I think are presenting here at CloudWorld, about they're starting to use OCI AI services with Siebel and of course with OCI, which they're focusing on much more significantly.
So there are real concrete examples today. You talked about a journey, and if I just talk about where we are today, where customers who are on Siebel can leverage OCI AI services right now. And
Absolutely.
I like talking to George, because George, when someone asked me when was that feature made available, I can roughly remember the year. But what I like about George is he'll tell you exactly which release it was, which month it was. So was that 22.10? Did you mention
It
earlier?
was,
Yeah, very good.
But this one, of course, again, because everyone's talking about it,
Yeah.
is just a repetition probably burned into at least my brain, and now through this in everyone's brains.
Well, so, and I think that one of the things that you just spoke about is the being able to leverage the elastic nature of the relationship with the cloud, is that if we need the power of the cloud, we're leveraging it, and when we don't need it, we're not using it. Right. So those are good examples of what people could be doing today. Mm-hmm. If I can sort of throw it open a bit wider and say, well, if we sort of project ourselves a few years in the future, and if we talk about CX in the wider sense, which I appreciate takes us into the realm of the crystal ball, if you like, where can we expect to see AI, and I would imagine, like you said, more precisely generative AI and those sort of new elements? Where do you see that changing how we do CX, or in the next 5 years, 7, 10 years? What do you see as the big things on the horizon from all the customers that you're talking to and the partners? Where do you see us going in that direction? I realize that's a big ask, because that's a lot of crystal ball.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of at least the Oracle approach, I think it's broader than CX. So Siebel is part of CX, but CX is part of the entire enterprise application space. With Redwood, and this has been going on for a few years, we've sort of been looking at Redwood not just as a user interface, but as a user experience. And so pulling in AI and analytics data into the conversation. And it's a search-based approach, but it's really trying to tap into all of your data to make sure that when you ask a question, Ask Oracle is the sort of the official front end of this. But when you ask a question, the answer that comes back is dependent on which accounts, perhaps if you're a salesperson that you're dealing with, or if you're in support, the relevant trouble tickets or service requests that are related to the particular area that you're looking for a solution in. So we're starting to really see that across all Oracle applications, and I'm sure this is true of outside of Oracle as well, really manifest as a user interface. It's something that's starting to bring personalization to the user, be it an employee or a partner or a customer. And so starting to bring that personalization out automatically based on the data. And that's really I think the big journey for enterprise applications as a whole that AI implies, I think over the next 5 years for sure, but we're starting to talk to customers about even beyond that, is the automation of experiences. We've over the last 20 years, we've seen and with Siebel we've got this two-speed approach where the core platform, the data model enriches, but the amount of data probably grows much faster. The business processes are embody the culture and the business of our clients. And really what we're seeing is what we have done is typically try to capture specific experiences based on a set of requirements or use cases. Both we and our customers do that, and our partners, of course, help with that. I think the Oracle Redwood approach and similar approaches elsewhere are starting to point at, well, let's keep that foundation going. Let's make sure that we've got all the data that we have, and then let the machine, if you will, modulate what the experience is for the end user based on the particular data that is meaningful in that moment.
It's interesting because that was a very good crystal ball, if you like, but it was founded and grounded in reality and grounded in what other partners are looking at. There are a couple of things that jumped out at me there that I was reading an article by an esteemed gentleman, I can't remember his name, Tom something or other, has something to do with Siebel, and he was talking about how some of the he's vaguely involved in that. Some of the challenges.
No names. Please.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And he was talking about some of the major risks involved, or the challenges, I think is a better word, involved with this sort of wholesale rush towards adoption of this. And he called out, first of all, an area that you touched on, is that the ability to make sure that whatever answer comes back is tailored to the role and the permission of the person who asked it. So we're not when I ask to see my best performing account, I don't end up looking at the accounts that belong to another salesperson. Rigidly sticking to the enterprise level rules. If I can talk Siebel for a minute, the visibility rules. And the second thing that he talked about was how even in the well-managed scenarios today, that the generative AI is capable of hallucination, is capable of producing something that is profoundly interesting, and you think that's very good, but upon scratching the surface, one realizes that it is in fact completely made up.
Right.
So you touched on the need that we're as we move into this kind of enterprise AI world, we're having to solve a lot of very big problems. And I was just thinking while you were talking that if I can sort of bring it back a little less far out and bring it a little more towards Siebel, that means that we have quite a number of challenges we have to think about with Siebel. I mean, all of a sudden we're going to have a large number of different data sources with potentially their own APIs, their own data models, that previously we would have struggled big time to solve. But it draws me into a conversation that I had this morning. I was at a visual builder presentation where obviously we were talking about Redwood. And if we look at how Siebel fits into the wider CX and the wider portfolio of Oracle applications, I'm thinking, well, where are we going with this? There needs to be some ability for some customers necessarily to perhaps think about how they present Siebel to the world. So in terms of what UX they're using, you touched on the need to focus on Siebel's UX.
Yeah.
So for me, there are quite a few challenges out there in the shorter term, in the 23, 24 sort of time frame. So can you talk a little bit about that sort of shorter time frame? What are we expecting to see in the 23, 24 scenario that might help customers of Siebel or partners thinking about, well, how do we solve some of these bigger problems? Because we're going to need to put stuff in place now, bearing in mind what you talked about as being 5, 6, 7 years from now. So what's in the sort of short-term, 2-year, 3-year roadmap for Siebel?
Yeah, there's a couple thoughts that come to mind. One is, what you're implying is really, it's, at least with the hallucination. Everyone's talking about guardrails now.
Yeah.
I think as soon as
This is the new terminology. Okay, guardrails.
So, and from a Siebel perspective, you alluded to the visibility model, absolutely important. That's the enterprise's best way to make sure that as you start opening the data up, you don't go hallucinate, or you don't go into, either PII or other visibility
GDPR,
things.
yes, we're into all sorts. Yes.
So you're making sure that the rules that are in place for your human your employees or partners are and customers ultimately are in place for AI as well. But I think the other is from the Oracle approach right now is not to, just to curb the chance that any hallucination or any guardrail is not sufficient, any hallucination gets out, is to always have a human make the last, take the last step, basically review. So the AI is going to be an assistant, but it will not be solely the last thing that talks to the customer. So that's an Oracle approach, and for Siebel that fits well, because Siebel is typically used by customers and partners.
Yes.
So the two go together. In the extreme, from a scalability perspective, you do want AI to get to your end customers and provide them the best service as well. So there'll be, to your point, between the short term and the maybe medium term, there will be some, as we gain confidence and hopefully increase the success rate and reduce the hallucination rate of AI. There will be tentative steps that we'll take in that direction, but we want to make sure that no planes are going down, no cars are crashing before we do that.
So, again, pulling it into more Siebel-centric terms, what's going to be happening in the next couple of years, or the 23 plus time frame, within the Siebel ecosystem that will facilitate those customers who are looking to I was very inspired by some of the presentations that I've and particularly yours, George, about the work that's gone on, notably with DX4C, but not just. And all of the tooling around that, and the things that are on the roadmap for 23-24. There were a couple that I'd really be interested to hear about, if we can talk about them. Is I know you talked about something called the API generator, and we also talked about how Siebel will. We talked a little bit about Redwood. I don't want to steal the thunder. Are you want to talk to either of those?
Sure, and if I can put it in context, you obviously attended the session, but and this is not new for this year. We've been talking about for a couple of years now. I think certainly last year, Siebel becoming part of a broader CX industry set of applications. So most of those applications are SaaS applications. They're focused predominantly on telco and utilities. But we're sort of connecting the two, if you will. The evolution with Siebel, this two-speed approach, moving Siebel into a cloud, preferably OCI from our perspective, starting to activate the data within Siebel, which is frequently in the terabytes, and that's really the food that will fuel AI.
Of course, it's all about the data.
Start to integrate Siebel with best-of-breed applications, be they front office or back office, so that you're getting a purpose-built, really a complete ecosystem for your industry. In the case of telco in particular, there's this industry-wide organization called the Telemanagement Forum, or TMF, who have had for a number of years a common data model, which is absolutely critical. When you're going to be interpreting data, you want to make sure that all the data means the same thing, regardless of which of many systems you're getting it from. They actually have a common process model, and then more recently a common set of APIs, which the APIs are newer, so not yet a full subset, at least in our visibility. But what we're starting to do is look at all of these as components that are building blocks towards building a complete industry cloud, of which Siebel is a part, frequently an important part, integrated to anywhere between 50 and 400 different systems within our customers' ecosystems, and trying to make sure that both the evolution and the revolution to a complete industry cloud that has a set of microservices. We are within Siebel starting to focus on what's sometimes called the MARC architecture. So that's microservices, API first, cloud native, and headless. And headless so that you now have these services that perhaps in the short term you assemble manually towards building an experience. But if we have, and our clients have difficulty today, creating custom experiences or applications with Siebel or multiple applications, that problem is going to explode as we further subdivide into microservices. So both the integration and the experience problems, I think, will get worse unless we tap into some of these automated ways of bringing together, or either standardized and automated ways of bringing together either different systems, so hence the industry standards in terms of integration, and AI in terms of or exploring the data and the metadata, including the usage metadata, to bring experiences together quickly, really having data-driven experiences. So it's sort of a holistic picture, if you will, of which Siebel is a part. It's an important part, we like to think, but it is still just one component of the entire ecosystem.
And so you touched on two major areas of focus, telco and utilities. In looking broader, I mean, I guess in a way you're hoping that customers who are in other fields, whether it be public sector, law enforcement, or for that matter any other, are in a position to at least explain their own common data model, their own TMF, if you will, so that you can assess where that fits into the work. I presume that the work you've already done, whilst you say it's targeting telco and utilities, that you've also done a lot of groundwork which could equally apply to other. It's not just, if I'm not a telco and not a utilities company, there's got to be value in it for me right now as well.
That's exactly right. And you mentioned the API generator, which, within this broader context, we see as able to generate, say, a TMF API for telco, or in the extreme, able to generate REST APIs for Siebel as a whole, regardless of what industry it is or who the customer is, because I think there's going to be a lot of discovery, and we don't yet know. When you open up your data within the guardrails we talked about earlier, you don't yet know what attributes are really meaningful. There are some that are called out in particular experiences, etc. But if you're going to start handing the steering wheel over to the to the self-driving CRM, you're going to have to give it everything and let it figure out. And it may be just for you or for me in a particular use case that a particular data attribute is meaningful, but you don't want to close that off. So I think the way we see the API generator is it's able to take anything that is within the Siebel business object, business component, business process model and expose it. Some of them will be driven by experiences that we know of today. Some of it could come from an industry standard, or we expect a lot of it will just come from what people have built within Siebel, and neither we, certainly, and occasionally even they, know is material in a particular moment. And I think that's where the API generator is going. We've inferred from what we've been building for telco what we need on a more universal.
And I think that's a key point, is that it's not that I would have expected anything less, is that the work that has gone on whilst targeting telco and utilities is ultimately part of a much broader picture for customers as a whole. And what I like about it is it puts customers in a position, as you just mentioned, is we're relying on the customers to come and say, well, this is what's materially useful for us. This is the model we have. In a sense, it's that learning that, way back in the day when a new version of Siebel would come out, Siebel shoes and socks, and then we'd say, well, that's because we had such an interesting dialogue with said shoes and socks manufacturer that we learned so much about what is materially important in their data model for them and their processes. It's the return of that dialogue, which has always been a real feather in the Siebel team's cap, which I really like. For those of you who weren't in Las Vegas, I thoroughly recommend trying to get hold of, I'm sure it's available on the massive media coverage of the presentation that you gave yesterday, George. I can't remember the session number, which gave us the sort of the broad brush of this is where we're going, because many of the themes that we've touched on today are actually mentioned also in that presentation.
Yeah, I don't remember the number either, not like 22.10.
I remember the number of people who applauded. There were many of them, so it was well worth
well, it was called Siebel CRM's modernization.
3 words that you like to hear, Siebel CRM and modernization. So yes, I thoroughly recommend picking it out, because it gives the listeners a chance to dig a little bit deeper into some of those themes. Clearly, Siebel is still, and I don't know why I say still, is an important part of this picture going forward. For our final question, since we never know what's around the corner, I've been asked to ask this question. You may or may not know that in the United Kingdom there's a very popular, with people of my age anyway, a radio show called Desert Island Discs, where celebrities, for example George Jacob here, are asked basically how would they survive on a desert island, and they have to choose, as it happens, several pieces of music to accompany their idyll on this island. So the question I'm going to ask you is, George, so you've been dropped on a desert island. Let's assume that we've given you 6 pieces of music. I won't talk about that. And you're allowed to choose one version of Siebel, assuming you have, let's say, a laptop or something to run it with, one version of Siebel to spend eternity with on this desert island, or at least until I breeze past in my speedboat and pick you up. I'll go first. I would pick, from a personal perspective, I would probably pick Siebel 2000. Because although I started work in Siebel 98, 2000 was really where the juggernaut suddenly started to take hold. It was it was also, I'd say, that the vast majority of the things that we see in the data model today, those concepts reached a certain level of maturity in Siebel 2000. Yeah. Functionalities that arrived in 2000 are still with us.
Yep, absolutely.
So I would choose Siebel 2000. So George, you're on your desert island. They've turfed you off. They've given you the laptop and said, see ya. What version would you choose to run? I suspect I see you probably going for Siebel. What was your first version of Siebel, by the way? What was the first one that you were involved with?
I came in May of 98, but I think the first release was Siebel 99, which actually went out, I think, in November or December of that year. And that was the merge of Siebel and Scopus.
Scopus, yes.
So a flurry of conflicting thoughts. There's obviously the first version, which one is attached to. There's I think it's the Danny Kahneman or whatever thing of peak and last. And I think that's maybe, you referred to the peak with 2000.
I was being a bit unkind. It was the first of many peaks. There were a few troughs, but it was the first of many peaks.
But it was a good one. I would go with last, 23.9. And let me give you a little bit of someone again, one of these Nobel Prize winners or someone said that the best way to forecast what you'll need for the next 5, 10, 20, or if I'm on this desert island for 30 years, in the case of Siebel, is to look back. We can, because the paths forward go in all directions. Neither of us, or I suspect none of the 7 billion of us, or 8, if whatever the number is, can predict where we'll be in 30 years.
Very
But
true.
we know very well where we've been in the last 30 years. And if I sort of look at the aggregation and the summation of everything that we've gone through over the last 30 years, I'd say my best bet is what I've accumulated. I know that every one of us, I think, is perfect for now, here and now, because that's where we've gotten. There is no other, unless you believe in multiverses or whatever, there is no other alternative. So this is the best you or me or Siebel. And so, from last Friday, Siebel 23.9 would be my best bet. I don't know whether this particular laptop has Internet Explorer, for example.
Ah, yes. Yeah. Did we tell you there was no electricity on the island? So kind of scuffed
there
it.
goes the laptop.
No, but let's assume it's a relatively modern laptop, but it also has Internet Explorer for backward compatibility. We'll let you have that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I would pick 23.9, and that's really fits with what we're telling our customers. A lot of the things that we've done to facilitate the API Gen, the first pieces are already in 23.9, but the things that we've been talking about in terms of tapping into AI, tapping into the APIs, and tapping into the data really in Siebel, and whatever cloud native functionality is available on this laptop on the desert island.
I think you'd probably have a private cloud if you did have one. Yeah. Yeah. So it certainly seems, from the conversation we've had today and from the sessions that we've been in, that Siebel is in a remarkably robust place for a 30-year-old, nearly 30-year-old piece of software. So even though, as George says, we're better off looking back, and I think that, I look back and I used to have hair, but if I look forward, I also feel very confident that desert islands or notwithstanding, that 10, 15, 20 years from now, we will be your avatars that are the people who used to be Richard and George. That sounds remarkably maudlin. We'll still be discussing what's on the horizon, what's coming.
Absolutely. We'll be here.
We will, probably indeed with the same room. This is actually just a green screen. This is all done in an office somewhere in the outskirts of London. George, on behalf of all of the Siebel Hub readers who are always eager to hear what you have to say, I must say it is always a pleasure to talk to you. You're so giving of your time and your knowledge, and that is a very rare thing indeed. And I thank you on behalf of all of us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard.
See you soon.
It's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Take care.